Thank you very much, Isabel. So yes, my name's Gwen, and I'm going to tell you about Dress for Success, which is a project that we undertook at Museums and Galleries Edinburgh over the last year to rehouse and document our costume collection. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So what was the problem? As you can see here, this is the People's Story Museum on the Royal Mile, and the costume collection was stored in the clock tower. The curatorial staff had known for quite a long time that this was not a suitable place for the costume collection. And in fact, the Scottish Conservation Studio carried out a report in 2013. It's a very small space. It's accessible only by very narrow spiral staircases. The environment is really inappropriate. Next slide, please. And here you can see some details of the store. So there are garments that are hanging that are not necessarily robust enough to be stored hanging, and they're also crammed into a wardrobe. There are boxes also that aren't actually accessible because they're stored behind other boxes. And then on my right hand side, you can see that there's a doorway there that leads directly to the clock tower, sorry, to the clock itself, and that it had to be regularly accessed by engineers working on the clock, hence the environment being really not particularly good. Next slide, please. So we needed to find a solution. We needed to find somewhere to move the costume to, somehow find some money in order to do the rehousing and work out who was going to work on this project with me. We decided to move the costume to the Museum Collection Centre, which is our main social history store. However, we did, in order to make space, have to move out another collection, to a more robust collection, to a different offsite store. We applied for money from Museums and Galleries Scotland, their small projects fund, and were able to get £5,000 to go towards the small amount that we had in-house to spend on it. So our budget was about 6,400 in total, most of which went on asset-free boxes and tissue, and also to work out who was going to work on the project with me, which curatorial staff and volunteers. And very fortunately, I was able to work with one of our social history curators, Victoria Garrington, who specialises in our costume collection. Next slide, please. So Vicky and I are here, and we started the planning and preparation stage in January of last year. We recruited a team of 6 volunteers. Originally it was going to be 4, but we had such a great response and volunteers that had a huge range of different experience. We decided that we would in fact do the project on 2 days a week rather than just 1 day a week, and also brought in another member of the curatorial team who wanted experience working with a different type of collection. So more people were involved than initially envisaged. I also procured the packing materials, which was one of the biggest headaches, in fact, of the whole project. And there were the logistical issues of actually moving the collection from the old site to the new site in our museum van with our technicians. Next slide, please. So then in April last year, it was time to implement the project, which was divided up into fairly clear-cut stages. Next slide, please. So here you can see one of our volunteers condition reporting a waistcoat. So the first stage was to condition report each garment. Next slide, please. Using a simplified version of our condition reports, which the volunteers were trained to complete using fairly standard vocabulary, to do standard assessments of the condition categories and the damage categories. And then this was then uploaded, transcribed onto EMU, which is our collections database. It was just easier to do it on paper and then transcribe it, because with the garments out on the benches and so on, there just wasn't really room for laptops. But it worked quite well, because it was also a way of quality checking the information that was going in. Next slide, please. Once every garment was condition checked, they would then be packed into new boxes. And that meant that all the collection really had a lot more room to breathe. They were in more suitable boxes. So for example, things like this 18th century dress, which was too long in its original box and had to be slightly folded, could now stretch out. Deeper garments could be in deeper boxes instead of being squashed in smaller ones. Things could be padded out and supported better, and also packed in a way that made them visible when you took the lid off, so you didn't need to necessarily take the garments out of the boxes in order to work with them. Next slide, please. Some garments did need to be marked, not everything, but here you can see Vicky talking some of the volunteers through object marking, finding a unobtrusive place to tack on a cotton label. Next slide, please. And finally, we undertook some photography. These were just record shots that we've uploaded to our database. We photographed about 200 garments, whereas we actually rehoused and documented 1,000 garments. But just the exercise of learning how to do the photography gave a lot of people new experience that we can apply in later projects. Next slide, please. So in terms of lessons learned, definitely need to allow more lead and time for delivery of materials. What should have taken 6 weeks took over 3 months. And as a result of that, there were delays in the project. So it was really important to keep those lines of communication open with the funder in case of delays. Next slide, please, because yeah, we were delayed by about 4 months in the end. But we also had a lot of things that we could learn and apply as next steps. So for example, we identified conservation priorities and were able to secure further funding to have this 18th century dress conserved. And I think Tula might actually be listening now, and she's working on this dress. And also to apply the lessons learned and all the stages that we applied as part of this process to the larger collections review that we are undertaking at the moment across the entire collection. Next slide, please. Yes, so thank you very much for listening, and also thank you to Museums and Galleries Scotland for their generous support of this project. Thank you.